Before we dive into this podcast with Andrew Usher, which is epic, I want to let you know it's my birthday this week. And to celebrate, I want to give you a discount off my courses. So to celebrate with me, I'm offering 40% off any single course and 20% off the course bundle, which gives you all 4 courses and the future courses as they are updated as well. So there's the world-class conditioning course for combat sports, and that covers everything about the physiology behind the conditioning, why you're doing what, and how to plan that for your combat sports preparation. I also have the warrior strength course for combat sports, and that covers everything around how to structure and plan your strength training so you don't end up in the problems where you're just running bodybuilding or powerlifting programs, being sore, tired, not feeling like you have that explosive power that others may have. Then there's the ultimate weight cutting course, and that's done by a friend of mine, Dr. James Moran, and he is the performance nutritionist for Rocky Fielding, and he has done a load of research in this area as well, which he shares in his course on weight cutting. He also runs through strategies that you can use leading into the fight, so starting further out when you're actually cutting weight slowly, and then the acute weight loss strategies that you can use and how to use them as you get closer to the fight. And then finally, we have my wife's course, Mona DeLacy, and that covers the mental side of combat sports. Obviously, we can train as much as we want and have that physical capacity to compete, but if you don't have that mental performance side sorted, that's where you can run into problems. And often you see some fighters may gas up quickly early in a fight, and it's often not the physical preparation that was the problem, it's the fact that their adrenaline was too high, they were too hyped up, and they came to the fight and they had a huge dump in adrenaline and they end up gassing out early. And we see that every now and then as well. So Mona runs through a whole range of strategies that you can use, including a workbook that you can work through to help develop the mental skills on your own through a course. So again, it's 40% off any single course and 20% off the bundle. Just go into the description, there'll be a discount code there. It's going to be SSOF B-Day. So SSOF B-Day. If you go down there, you can apply that to any of the courses, and all the links are in the description. But enjoy this episode. Again, but welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. Today we have Andrew Usher. Welcome, Andrew. No, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for
questions in my head already, and I guess we connected through the Facebook group. So if anyone was listening to this and they listened to last week's episode with James Ramsey, he's the owner of the Facebook group. Andrew's also in this group, and I guess maybe let's start with a bit of your background and maybe some of your PhD research, so then we can go ahead and cover essentially a bunch of range of questions.
Yeah, so I kind of, I'm getting on in years. So I grew up in the late 70s, early 80s in East End of Glasgow, and we basically played footy, which would be soccer, and we did boxing and karate, and that was kind of really my love for combat sports. I was never that good at it, but I loved it. And then in my teens did Muay Thai, did a lot of boxing on SSOF, and just that was it. But it wasn't until my late 30s when I had Straight Blast Gym affiliate training group that I started to really think about better ways to approach S&C and just basic training methods. It kind of struck me pretty early on in the MMA world that we were doing things that coaches had done that had been taught by coaches, and there was no real method or understanding about why we were doing it. So around about 35 was a big change for me. At that time, my wife and I had a medical practice in a remote area, so my whole life became obsessed with anatomy, physiology, and all that good stuff. And then in my 40s, kind of moved away from MMA back into kind of probably more boxing. I still coach amateur and professional, and from probably the last 7 years, been really heavy on research. Masters was looking at the underlying physiology of amateur boxing, looking at aerobic capacity and lactate thresholds and things. And the PhD is a world's first look at professional boxing using near-infrared spectroscopy to look at the difference between systemic and peripheral oxygen delivery at the muscle tissue and what that really means from a performance connotation. So that's kind of the PhD. We're in a really beautiful position at Abertay University in Scotland because A, they let me do my PhD, which is a good start, and B, they have made combat sports the sole research focus for sports and exercise science. So we will be doing, predominantly our research is going to be down that route. I think we might be one of very few and definitely only university in Scotland that's main research focus is combat sports. From a private business type of thing, obviously my private business, I work with Hannah Rankin, who's kind of world champion female boxer. I work with her. I'm her performance specialist, and I work with kind of numerous other athletes as well. And we do a whole range of services. I mean, I refer to myself now as probably a performance specialist than anything else, because it's a mixture of everything from sports science, exercise phys to S&C.
Awesome.
And that's it. Generally quite boring, dull, and just live my life in a lab. That tends to be it. Like, the sun's killing me.
That's the exciting stuff. Do you want to maybe explain, because a lot of the listeners would be kind of like your amateur, semi-pro, maybe some professional, but mainly fighters that maybe don't have a grasp of the sports science. So you want to maybe cover, you mentioned your PhD, you're looking at the difference, systemic versus, I guess, peripheral oxygen uptake. Do you want to maybe dive into the details of why that's important, you know, what you're kind of looking at there?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that kind of struck me probably watching a lot of sparring and having a lot of athletes compete was try and get this idea of what's a rate limit or what's inhibiting performance. Because we can get the strength right, we can generally get the conditioning right, although often I think that's one of the main issues. But the delivery mechanism of how they actually translate VO2 and oxygen, obviously through respiration and everything else, into the muscle tissue seems to be, to me, a limiting factor. And what we noticed when we started putting near-infrared sensors on the legs and things was that when there was a massive difference in what the kind of oxygen profile looked like in a spar session versus pads and bags. So there was clearly something going on. And the best way, probably the easy way to think about this is I always explain to athletes, is like, we want to match the engine with the right chassis. So if you've got a Ferrari engine, you want a Ferrari chassis. And in that engine, there is all the fine-tuning components, and that's what our PhD is. It's looking about how do we get fuel to the muscle tissue, how does it extract that oxygen, and how does the muscle respond. Probably more importantly for me is how does the muscle tissue recover, especially between rounds. So we're kind of looking at that, and then we're looking at, does biomechanics affect how oxygen delivery is performed to the muscle tissue via the capillary bed? You know, is a boxer heavy on the front leg, so therefore that leg is having to work much harder than the other leg, so therefore is a kind of difference in symmetrical value. And what you tend to find is that we tend to think things in systemic terms, so we tend to think of cardiac output, stroke volume, all these types of things in VO2 max, but we tend to think less about what's the actual muscle doing. Because if you put Moxie sensors or Portamon sensors on the rec fem on the left and the right leg and you do back squats, those two muscles won't necessarily use oxygen at the same rate. There can be a slight difference in it. So that led me to think, well, why would that be? And then when you watch sparring, you see some fascinating things about recovery. How quick can the tissue desaturate and use oxygen, and how quick can it resaturate? And we'll start to find that athletes that are really well conditioned use oxygen very quickly, have a nice like homeostasis through the middle, and then resaturate really fast. And the profile is very similar between pads, bags, and sparring. Deconditioned athletes, it's
interesting.
It's all over the place. So our whole big thing is really applied science and performance. How do we get recovery to be as optimal as possible? Because a lot of fights are won through that endurance component, especially your 10s and 12 rounders. You know, you get 36 minutes of work. Often a lot of coaches are doing great work, but they're not actually thinking about the recovery kinetics and how that having a knock-on effect. And we kind of specialise probably in the recovery kind of kinetics. You
posted the other day about
conditioning
sparring,
and strength.
about potentially not preparing boxers for, you know, I guess the demands of boxing. I think there was something like that. Do you want to maybe dive into that? You mentioned there now about pads versus sparring as well. Maybe deconditioned athletes maybe see a big difference in terms of how the muscles use oxygen and their recovery in those two different modalities.
Yeah. So I think the interesting thing for me was that the idea of the PhD was to get an idea of what does the underlying physiology do in the different training methods, because nobody's ever looked at it. The amateur boxing has predominantly looked at VO2 max and lactate thresholds, and that's about as exciting as it's got. That to me was quite boring. I wanted to know, well, what's the muscle tissue doing? Because at the end of the day, how that muscle is performing in that kinetic chain is really going to dictate how success and the mechanics are going to be delivered. So when we started looking at the pad work and the bag work, we started to see that bag work generally, athletes are not really got high enough volume and a high enough intensity. A lot of them are still very old school. They go in, the beeper's on, the 3-minute round. They go from one bag, then they go to the next. There's no intensity driving it. So there's no mitochondrial capacity change. So we noticed that straight off the bat. Then when you go into the pads, a lot of times you realise they're doing very low-level technical work. They're not actually doing any intensity. within the technical component either. So we start to see a different profile there. And then when you go into the ultimate expression, which is sparring, you see it's a completely different picture. So, but interestingly for us, and this is the thing that blows a lot of coaches' minds when we speak to them, the thing that probably represents sparring physiologically, and I mean from the muscle tissue action, more than anything else, are 30-second Wingate tests. Because the muscle tissue has to desaturate at a much quicker rate and resaturate. And that is closer to sparring than anything else, which is kind of mind-blowing. So it's led us down this path about, is mitochondrial capacity the key factor in endurance, and can we increase that in athletes across all three areas? And to do that, that would mean that athletes would probably have to have much more targeted bag sessions, pad sessions, and spar sessions. Now, that's what I do with Hannah Rankin. That's probably been the success of her World Championship run. And that's what I've done with Dean Sutherland and the preparation for his WBC Silver run. And that's what's made the biggest changes, is that changing conditioning from just being very ad hoc sessions to very targeted sessions to deliver mitochondrial capacity change. And that's, I think, where we get the biggest bang for buck. Because I think when you've got a good pro and they've had a good amateur, they know how to fight. They've been there, they've done it so many times. So when we get them, we put them through a whole series of tests. I mean, I could explain my whole testing process if you want, because it's probably slightly different to most people.
More of an insight into kind of what you're doing and what you're looking at.
Yeah. So the first thing every athlete that comes to the labs, we do a movement assessment. Okay, now that movement assessment is just years of attending different courses and stripping down what we think represents the best kind of sequence or kind of movements that represent boxing. But also, from my perspective, I'm looking at movement screening as a way of not are they passing tests, but how are they passing the test? What they're doing to cheat the test, because every athlete cheats it, right? So, because what we get a lot of times is you get an athlete comes in, it could be a UFC fighter, could be an undisputed world champion, they bring their S&C coach in. The first thing we always go is, when was the last time did you do a movement assessment? And 9 out of 10 times they'll never have done one. There's just never been screened for anything. So we do a very simple thing. We do like a toe touch, we do lunge testing, we do isometric strength tests, we do a whole heap of things, and we basically blueprint, are they able and capable to be doing deadlifting for a start? Things like this. Because 9 out of 10 times we see a lot of asymmetrical issues that we can clean up. And so a lot of times, for example, when they're deadlifting, they're pulling most of the power through one side rather than two sides. You know, the usual stuff. So that's the first thing we do. We then put them through a whole series of testing, which is basically VO2 max tests. We don't tend to do the VO2 components much. We use the incremental treadmill test quite a lot. We do Wingate testing. We do upper lower body strength test on the isometric chair. We then do force. We look at striking on the force platform. We analyse striking mechanics and biomechanics. We do a wee bit of 3D movement assessment, and we just piece it all together. And what we're looking for is the consistency between the tests. And what we tend to find is most athletes come in have very poor limited movement that's just never been picked up in S&C sessions. We tend to find that the Wingates are showing very poor recovery, and there's a lot of cardiac drift between sprint 1 and sprint 2. And the interesting kicker for us is combat athletes, especially boxers, tend to have more force production in their upper body than lower body. When we put them on the isometric chair and we do isometric strength testing, without a shadow of a doubt, the upper body is always stronger than the lower body, which blows my mind, right? And then you turn to the S&C coach and go, you ain't doing legs enough, are you? You know, and then you realise it's right now. So people associate me and a big X landmine press, that I don't like landmine pressing. And the reason I don't like landmine pressing is I think it's overused. It's not that I don't like it, I just think it's very, very overused. And I think, you know, if you look at Seth's paper on that kind of biomechanics and the mixed methods paper on striking, you can clearly see lower legs all the way up, you know, deltoids last to activate forearm. So any athlete we work with, we're probably more heavier on leg work than we are upper body work on strikers. And we tend to find most athletes coming to us are the opposite way around. They think everything is coming from the shoulders. They have to deliver it through the chain. So that's kind of our testing process. So we do movement assessment, we do physiological testing, we may do VO2 max testing, we do NURS testing, and we do strength testing and force production testing, because we want to see, is all of it leading to the ultimate expression, which has been able to deliver force on the force plate. And then we'll maybe look at sparring data. We'll go grab sparring data, because that is where we see, is all this stuff they're doing, is it translating to the spar session? And probably 60% of the time it doesn't. Yeah. You know, they look good, they make weight okay, they're maybe sitting 12% body fat, they look pretty jacked, but it falls apart under specific, yourself, lab testing is a completely different beast. If I make an athlete do an all-out Wingate and they've never done repeated sprints at super maximal level, they're going to struggle and hurt, which they all do. The back door is littered with food from people throwing up over the last 6 months of research. It's a running joke. It's kind of, we can normally identify people's dinner from the night before, after super maximal. They're not easy. But that's basically the testing process, and from that we create a nice blueprint and we look at, is there cardiac drift, is the recovery maybe not there, are they lacking a little bit of strength in the legs? Generally, I don't do as much of the strength work as I used to do. I tend to feed that back to the S&C coach to be changed up, and we'll just give them some guidance on what we're kind of looking for. And then we'll normally do in a camp, in an 8-week camp, we'll do week 1, probably week 3, and then we'll maybe do week 5 or 6, and we'll just do 3 testing sessions, just to make sure things are actually moving in the right place. I'm just a big lover of, if we test it, we know something's changing. If we don't test it, we don't know if it's changing. For sure. Not. So it's pretty straightforward. It's nothing rocket science, nothing really. I mean, the research is a bit more high end because of what we're looking at, but the actual application, it gets distilled down into something pretty simple. Because you know yourself, I can't say to an athlete, go put this moxie on and tell me what your desaturation level is in 15 minutes.
And they go, fuck off.
It's just not going to happen. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and people tell me fuck off all the time. So it's a kind of it's a highly physiologically driven route, but really we do all the heavy lift in the back end. One of the big things a massive, you need to do this for us, is heart rate monitor. Now it's interesting because everybody does red zone training, but I think people fail to understand that the red zones are irrespective, because athletes will get to peak heart rate very quickly, right? That should be the on kinetics. We should be getting them there. It's how quick can they get out of it and how quick can they get back in it. Gotcha. It's a more interesting tale when it comes to that kind of physiological kinetics. So an average day for me is Hannah will do a spar where heart rate monitor or moxie sensors. I'll get the data. We've written all the Python code. We will run it, and I'll be able to say, right, you're on track for where we need you to be. You're maybe off track. We need to change up some of your sessions, and that's it. It's quite a seamless process. It's fucking taken years to make it that seamless, to the point where. Yeah, because the data we are very data heavy, and we have probably a good 10 years worth of data now, which is good because we have a nice normalization database, so we can benchmark most athletes now to where they should fit in with other people. Not that that's a given, because everyone's quite unique, but we have a rough benchmark of where we should be, and that's been it. And the boxing world either likes what we do or it fucking hates it. It's supposed to hate it.
Well, goes against tradition, doesn't it?
Yeah. I'm referred to as a legacy coach, which means I'm an old fuck, because I'll be 50 this year. But we are doing some good stuff. We had really nice meetings with Gary Hutt from Team GB. We'll be down at Team GB lately to discuss the research and a few other things. So I think there's a nice move towards trying to understand what is performance really, rather than just this label at S&C. Everyone's a fucking S&C coach now, which pains me quite a lot, because a lot of times they come in and you just wonder what's actually happening here. Why are you holding your breath doing back squat and shit? Why? And nasal breathing. Nasal breathing is the other big thing at the moment. A lot of athletes come in, they're telling me they're doing nasal breathing.
The new trend.
And I'm like, you've got two. Yeah, and I'm like, you've got 2 pipes in your mouth. One's fucking bigger than the other. Breathe. So we are a bit marmitey, I guess, what we do. Some people like us, some people don't like us. But we're all about performance. My supervisor, John Barry at Abertay, John's 52, we just love this shit. We just live for performance and, making people better. That's just, we just love it. Even at our age, we're still not jaded yet, because we think there's still a lot more to be found.
I've got a whole lot of questions. I'm going to see if I can remember them all. But first, you mentioned, obviously, Seth research this. If anyone's interested, Seth wrote a blog post on how to throw a powerful jab on Sweet Science of Fighting. You guys can find that. That's really good. He breaks down some of his research there too, and I break down a lot of it in how to punch harder as well. And secondly, there's a whole lot of... I'm going to start with maybe your sprint protocols, and I'm going to come back to your oxygen kinetics in terms of recovery. But is this kind of where your sprint power and endurance protocols kind of stemmed from the idea that a lot of the boxers aren't getting the intensity in their training, and this is kind of like your way of putting intensity within their training week?
Yeah, so John, my supervisor, his whole last 20 years of research has been basically sprints and high intensity training. That's basically been John's work for the last 20 years. When I started working with John last year, I was a bit unconvinced by it, to be brutally honest. I was still very much, we need a bit more volume of the training. And then we started applying it to a lot of athletes and looking at the research and looking at what I was aiming to look at from systemic and peripheral recovery. And we started to pilot it and we started to get really good results. And I think you're right. I think what happens is people think they're doing high intensity. It's like the old days of the Tabata when it went crazy. Nobody was fucking doing that stuff at the intensity level. That
and if you want to know more, guys, search Tabata for fighters on Google and you'll find and you'll see me talk about exactly that. If you're doing real Tabata, you're fucked by the end of it, to the point where you're going to fall off the bike. It did probably sell a lot of timers though. I mean, so from the timer market space, it sold a shitload. So we're pretty much the same. So we know from the research that all you need is about 60 seconds worth of high supramaximal effort, probably 3 times a week, 9 sessions, and you're probably going to start to see some mitochondrial change. Now, it's too early to say this, but I'll kind of make a bold claim. One of the research projects we're doing is looking at a non-invasive way to measure mitochondrial capacity through blood flow occlusion, NIRS, doing like an incremental treadmill test and remeasuring, and we're seeing that the sprint training is definitely increasing mitochondrial capacity. So that's a good thing because we obviously have more ability to create ATP, blah, 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 blah. So for us, sprints is integral. Now, sprints to us is not just running or bikes, but it's how you use the bag. So, for example, Hannah, we have her on very specific bag sessions. So she might do 20 seconds all out, 10-second recovery, and she'll maybe repeat that for one round. Or sometimes we'll mix it up. We'll do 20 seconds on, 60 seconds off, 30 seconds on, 50 seconds off, and we'll just start to do undulating. So we mix up the protocols. But basically, for us, the discovery, it's not a discovery, it's in the research. There's a lot out there. Supramaximal is where you need to be to get those fast adaptive changes. So I'm a big believer, which is why the S&C world hate me. I'm a big believer that technical skill is part of it. Boxers need to box. Right. MMA fighters need to be able to fight MMA. At the end of the day, So that's it, right? So we need to fix everything round about that ultimate outcome. That's what we need to do, rather than spend endless hours doing S&C stuff that's probably getting no transfer. So sprints to us is very sport specific. It can be, but it's also very low time wise. So they can come and do a sprint session and then still in the afternoon go and do their technical pad session. It doesn't really interfere too much. Because the kickback initially was, you cannot have kids fucking do supramaximal sessions 3 times a week. And we were like, why not? Nobody's dying from it, right? Nobody in the lab's died. And the response was good. And the reality is it's 60 seconds of work. It could be 3 20-second sprints, or it could be 6 10-second sprints with a massive delay between them. You can mix this up any way you want, as long as you get roughly 60 seconds of supramaximal work. So for us, it's very, you can play with it in the schedule, and all the athletes that we have that are doing exceptionally well in recovery metrics are all doing these high intensity. Is it something you do year round then? Or is this kind of like after maybe, I don't know, GPP phase or whatever it is, and you do this maybe after that? Or are you doing this, hey, all year round, we're hitting this 60 seconds, in a session or a week?
So we're big on having athletes train 52 weeks of the year and sitting at roughly out of camp between 5 and 7% above fight weight max. So we like our athletes to be ready for a lot of reasons. One is it's just good self-management. 2, there's no crazy weight cuts. And 3, because of COVID, opportunities are everywhere. So the more able you are to get into fight camp, and even a shortened one, the better. That's kind of played very nicely into the sprint protocols because we can get people's conditioning back relatively quickly on the sprint protocols. So what we'll do is John's been doing these fucking in the lab for 10 years, hasn't he? So he's churning out like 1200 watts at 52 non-stop and stuff. Maybe not as much as that. I think he's dropped to 800. But we do sprints all the time. So we'll be in their schedule twice a week. They'll do sprints for me. And they all hate it. I mean, if Hannah was on the podcast, she would be swearing at me all day. She absolutely, but the interesting thing for her is, and we were talking about this with her the other day actually, because we had looked to bring in a different kind of protocol to her, and she was like, I'm not so keen on it, let's change it back. And she said to me, as much as I hate the bike, she goes, mentally and psychologically, it gives me something that other things don't give me. Those super maximal efforts really take me to a dark place that I have to get through them. So psychologically, I think it provides the athletes a difficult week every week, but they get through it. And so we're pretty much, I think, we've not seen any detriment to it. We won't obviously do them in a taper. So the last 2 weeks of fight camp, we won't do them. So we will take, so actually it's not 52 weeks, it'll be maybe 48 weeks or whatever, or 40 weeks, depending, actually, I think about it. But pretty much, we're doing them all the time. But we like to do other things as well. Like, I like athletes on a Monday, rather than do long, steady state runs, I like, a good fast 5K. So we will have them do a 5K run. So most of our athletes will do a 5K sub 20 minutes. Damn, that's quick. Probably anywhere from 16 minutes to about 18 minutes, 12. Yeah, they all can do it. And they like it because it's a challenge. We'll get a massive leaderboard of athletes all around the world in these 5Ks. As a fat old bloke, I can knock out a 5K in 21 minutes. So there's no excuse for an athlete. And it's like a sprint. And I like to do them on the Monday because it's a nice, because we used to use HRV and stuff, and I've went away from that. But this is a nice wellness metric. Because if their 5K is 18 minutes and then 1 week it's dropping off to 23, you're kind of like, were you partying at the weekend? What's happened? What's changed your stats? How was sparring at the weekend? Because a lot of my athletes are quite remote. Yeah. So everything we do is probably get a bit of speed and pace on it. We encourage, if an athlete likes to run, I don't have a problem with it. Some of our athletes, like Hannah likes to be in the altitude chamber, she likes to do her runs in there, that's fine to have a problem with it. I just don't want athletes doing 10 miles every 3 days every 3 days, but I want a bit more sport. I'd rather they be in the gym working on technical work. Rather than spending maybe a 2 hour run. So we're fast on everything.
You've added more questions into my head. I'm going to try and remember them all. I guess
I'm like a bigger rabbit hole.
I know. Okay, let's start here where we are now then about the running with intensity. So are you then banking on the technical sessions to hit that lower intensity, I guess, aerobic work? Because I guess in my mind I'm thinking, okay, we're doing speed, I guess 5K, that's still aerobic and stuff like that, and obviously you're doing the sprints. But then if we're looking at maybe physiology, and to say we're looking at maybe eccentric hypertrophy of the heart, I guess you're still getting a lot of that stuff from the stuff, but I guess if you're targeting really low intensity work that's not going to maybe bleed into fatigue for technical training, does that fit somewhere in your week model, or is it more, okay, technical training takes care of that, I'm just taking care of intensity?
Yeah, so when we started doing the research, we started to realise that most of the technical training was in that kind of low, probably 120 to 150 heart rate range. It was really in that kind of slow cardiac output range. So the problem we identified pretty early on was that was the issue. That people are fucking lazy. So people won't do balls to the wall, super maximal bag session. Yeah. So that actually was the component that was missing. People think they're working hard until you actually monitor it and actually look at what is the kinetics, how quick are they getting to peak heart rate, and how quick is that peak heart rate coming down, and is it a slower fast phase of recovery? Until you do that, you don't know. You're just assuming that they get up to 180 beats, they stop, 60 seconds later they've dropped 40 beats, and you're like, fucking brilliant. Well, what we've got with Hannah Rankin is she can drop 79, 80 beats at round 10 in sparring and recovery, standing. Right, so she can drop massive, and she's got a very, really super nice fast phase of recovery and then a slow at the end, which is kind of what we want. So unless you look at it and you know how to analyse it, a lot of times you're just doing things because it looks good, but you've got no quantifiable way of measuring how hard are they actually training. So even in the gym in Aberdeen, Davy McAllister's up at Northern Sporting Club, where we work with the pros and stuff, the bag sessions are all heart rate monitored. So everything's monitored. So we know if these kids are not working hard, and they have very targeted thresholds they need to hit in those sessions, because we know a lot of times when they're in doing the S&C, it's just that low zone. If they're on the Concept 2 rower, they're probably just fucking around. They're not going crazy on it. So the issue for me is when we physiologically test them, we can see what the recovery's like, and that gives us an indication of, what VO2 is like, what VO2 kinetics is like, what oxygen kinetics is like, and how that relates. Because the interesting thing about boxing is you don't need a massive aerobic capacity to be successful.
Interesting.
Right? If you look at the research, and I did a systematic review of this, which we need to publish this at
Yes,
some point. We need to
please.
think about this. But I've looked at the data over the last 27 years, and when you look at the VO2 max, it goes from 2003, the Kravitz paper, pretty low, about 43 milliliters per kilogram per minute, and the highest end within a C paper is about 65. And that's in world-class amateurs, right? So you're looking 25 years worth of data, 43 to 65, 66. That's not massive. Most sit about the 55 to 60 zone, right? So that's the aerobic capacity you need to be a world-class amateur at Olympic level. So we kind of looked at that and we thought, okay. And then we looked at lactate thresholds in the research, and basically it just more or less says what you'd expect. Boxers need to tolerate high millimoles of lactate. So that's it. So you look at that, you think, well, how much steady state running do they really need to do then to develop that? If that's the zone that, and we've had world undisputed champions in there, some of the worst fucking VO2s in the planet, but are still undisputed, right? Because the reality of the sport is that it's just one of these sports that you could have an athlete that's got the shittiest plan on the planet, but it's still knocking people out. Because there is a variable you can't factor in, which is the actual combative bit in the ring. So we don't know what that is. But so what we're doing is trying best to prepare for all of it. So when we looked at it, we thought, well, all these long steady state run-ins are probably not giving us any more than what we're going to get. So what we did to quantify it, I thought, fuck it, let's take some kids, really look at that side and see what the VO2 change is, and let's take a percentage of other athletes, and we'll do portable gas analysis. And we'll do pads, bags, and we'll look at what VO2 peak is and what substrate utilization looks like. And it's just like you expect to see. Early rounds, predominantly fat oxidized. Heavier rounds, more carbohydrate utilization. So theoretically, it's a mixed substrate. Okay, intensity is driving substrate utilization. Just basic physiology in a nutshell. So when we looked at this, we thought, okay, so what is the most important metric we can give these kids to be successful? And it's recovery. Because if they recover between the rounds, obviously, they're more cognizant, they can take instruction better, but they can last longer, and they can have much more explosive power, they can push off the back foot, they can drive more. So for us, that was it, really, and that's why we went down that route. So less on the cardiac output, because generally they're lazy and they're not training super maximal, so a lot of times they're getting it. But if they want to run because they feel like they need to do it, which some of them do need to do it because they're just like, I need to run, I don't have a problem with it, because it's not giving us anything extra, but it's not taking anything away either. Unless they're picking up musculoskeletal injuries in the ankles and stuff like overturning or overplaying. If that's an issue, then we'll rein them back. So conscious of what people believe, I'm not anti-running. I'm just like, because people fucking think I hate running. I mean, I've seen this in forums and fucking Facebook posts, that cunt doesn't like running, blah, 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 blah. I've run all my life. I run a lot. So, I mean, I run 100Ks and all that stuff. I mean, I like running. But I just don't think it's good for performance. I think if you're taking most of your week is taken up with running, and you've got no time for S&C or technical, then you should be questioning why you're doing that amount of running. Because at the end of the day, you're not an ultra runner. I mean, I joke with most of the lads that we have. I go, like, if this career goes south, you could probably be a professional park runner and do your 5Ks at the weekend and win some titles. So that's kind of our approach. Our approach really is more about the delivery and the applied side. So that's why. If that answers the ramble.
James Ramsey obviously posted my Stop Doing Roadwork article in the Facebook group, and that obviously got a lot of people up. That article was geared towards, like, I try and run myself more towards the amateur fighter who's maybe only training 3, 4, 5 times a week in their sport. My view is, don't waste your time doing that for conditioning. If you're only training 3, 4, 5 times in the gym, you need to layer more technical stuff on if you want to get better. So obviously, similar things to you there. But I wanted to dive into as well. For someone listening, how can they measure their max heart rate easily? Maybe with just a heart rate monitor. And then looking at those kinetics, for example, maybe they want to measure, after listening to this, how quickly they can get to max heart rate, then how quickly they can recover. Is there any protocol or something they can do or use to kind of measure that themselves easily?
I would just say start wearing it in pad sessions, bag sessions, and spar sessions, and just start to look at the difference between them, and look at the 60-second recovery point. Just look at, rather than just look at, you've hit 184 and you're dropping to like 144. Look at the curve. So what we do is we run exponential curve fit. So what we will do is run fancy linear regressions in the background to find out what the true mathematical predicted curve or rate of decay is, and we map it off that way. But you don't need to do that. You could just look at the curve. If you've got a really nice linear curve and you've got, you're doing well. If you've got a very long, protracted slope, you're not doing so well. So what you're looking for that 60 seconds is a nice initial fast recovery, so a nice fast slope down and then a slower slope. And that's the easiest way of doing it. So we have all the lads, so everyone does it. Hannah, all the females, males, all our athletes, irrespective of the backgrounds, just heart rate monitor, get on the polar flow, and just look at your data afterwards and think to yourself, how hard was that session? And then look at it, and then look at how quick did it take to get your peak heart rate. So you look at the curve up and you go, okay, so it took me maybe, 50, 60 seconds before I got there in a 3-minute round. So you're like, you may want that a bit quicker. And then look at the recovery and see how long into your 60 seconds were you recovered. And you'll see often with deconditioned, they've not fully recovered. So look at the baseline of where you start. So if you're starting at 130 beats, and then you do your first round of sparring and first round of bags, then look at, well, where am I now? Have I went back to baseline, or am I slightly above baseline? And if you're above baseline, how far above baseline are you? Because you want to get within a nice, probably 10, 15% margin. So that's the easiest way of doing it. And then you can start to trend it and get a feel for how does that compare to a 5K run? Is a 5K run like a heavy spar session? Is it like a bag session? And start quantifying the mind. Because one of the things we do a lot with the boxers is, especially with the Moxie stuff, excuse me, is use it as a biofeedback tool. So in between rounds, they'll come over, we'll look at the data and go, plenty in the tank. And a lot of times they will know there's plenty in the tank, and a lot of times they'll be like, fuck, I feel fucked. And you're like, no, you're just been shite this today. Just get back out there, you're okay. And the same in bag sessions, we'll do this. So a lot of times, if we have an athlete that doesn't know when they're peaking, what we'll do is I'll have them do a bag session, and I'll say to them, when you peak, or you feel like you're at max heart rate, just step away from the bag. Okay, if you reach peak without stepping away from the back, I'm going to tap you on the shoulder and you're going to step back, and we're going to get you back to baseline recovery. Then you're going to go back in. And by doing that over a period of months, they start to know when they're starting to peak in a spar and when they need to pull it back, when they need to break away, get a little bit of relaxation, let their muscles relax. So we do a lot of like probably sports psychology work as well. And we bring in, but we do other things as well. Like we'll make them do complex mathematics, which they hate in spar sessions on the bag. So we'll do, like we'll set the combinations. 1 is 2 is a jab cross, whatever. And we'll go like 20 minus 17 plus 6 minus 4 plus 2 minus 1 is, and they have to resolve it whilst keeping heart rate. So we do a lot of all that type of stuff as well, a lot of cognitive drilling, just because we want in the recovery round, especially the kids that are on like elite boxing group level and compete nationally, we want them to be able to hear commands and be able to process those commands while sparring. Because I think that's something that's missing from the sport as well, is that corner delivering commands and the athlete being able to recognise the command and then change the gameplay and do task relevant cues. So we do that with heart rate as well. So they change their game plan. If they feel like they're peaking, they know through all the biofeedback stuff that they need to go back to a much more defensive, break away from the centre of the line, kind of just relax. When they feel good, go back in and re-engage. And we just basically always teaching them how to recover. So there's an absolute load of stuff you can do at heart rate monitor that people just don't tend to do. They just put it on, go for a run and go.
I said steady state cardio.
Because they are polar, you bastard. The thing is like, in the boxing, when they hit the bags, if you know what the max heart rate is, and you want a really hard session, you want to push into that zone and back away from that zone. Get yourself back down, push into that zone, back away. That's how you're going to develop recovery. You develop that kind of response to allow you to relax, that diastolic element.
That's going to be my next question.
But if you don't train that way, if you don't train that, you're never going to get it. And a lot of boxing and high-level boxing is in the game plan is really about that. How do you change the game plan if things are going shit, which they will go at some point? How do you relax? How do you recover between the round? And are you going to be as fresh in the later rounds? Especially when you look at super bantamweight, there's not a lot of knockouts in those fights. A lot of them go the distance. And when they start moving through their journey, they go from the 4 rounds to the 6 rounds, to the 10s to the 12s. You want to make sure that, they're just as fresh as what they are, So for us, it's all about just constantly monitoring. We monitor everything. It amazes me when you get world-class athletes come to us, to the labs, and you go, "Did you bring your heart rate monitor?" And they go, "We don't have one." I'm like, "Really?" I'm like, "You're not measuring anything?" They go, "Don't measure anything." And you're like, "Fuck."
Damn.
it just blows my mind. But then that's my bias. So that's something I have to deal with, 'cause that's
let's
my
take,
bias.
for example, say an amateur fighter listening to this. Maybe he was only boxing 4 times a week and he's preparing, I don't know, local events or whatever. Would you then still, would you go sprint protocols is what you should do, even though maybe you're not getting that aerobic work from the technical side because you're only in there maybe 3-4 times a week? Or would the approach slightly change just because they're not training as much as the professional fighters that you have?
So amateurs, we will have them on sprints. We will sometimes get them to the sprints after their technical work. So we'll let them get their technical work out the way, and then we'll say, like, just jump on the assault bike and just... Because for us, it's about what is driving recovery is probably mitochondrial capacity. And the more mitochondria you can have, the more you're going to produce energy. So therefore, the more you're going to potentially recover, the more you're going to be able to produce more work. So for us, it's all about developing that. And we know that one of the benefits of repeated sprint intervals is it's a very fast way of getting it. You can obviously get it through other ways as well, but for us, it's just a very easy thing. And it's an easy sell after they've done their pad work and stuff. And just go, right, just jump on the bike, just give me 20 seconds on the assault bike, 10 seconds off, 3 of them, and you can go home. And generally, they're pretty receptive to it because they're like, okay. And it's like covert stealth kind of mitochondrial capacity development. And because if they're only in 3 times a week, then you're very limited. You know, your exposure time is limited. How do you get your S&C factored into that? This is the problems with amateurs a lot of times, as well as I sometimes think we negate some of the strength work as well at times. But it is a challenge. It can be a challenge with pros as well. A lot of pros don't want to do the S&C side.
For sure.
They just want to do pads, bags.
It's the same in every sport.
You know, so I think it's a challenge we all face. I have a harder way. We work a lot with kind of BMX downhillers, and they don't want to do S&C at all. Is what they're like, what's the point? And you're like, well, you know, you could push harder. You could probably, you know, you could kill yourself probably in a quicker time. You have a bit more power on the legs. So yeah, it is difficult, but amateurs, I think amateurs is difficult as well. I think amateurs get a lot of other issues as well, like the weight, making the weight, especially fighting multiple times per day. And this is one of the things that we are really interested in the recovery for amateurs. This is like a lot of our kids when they're at box cups and stuff are maybe fighting 2 or 3 times a day in that format. So we do a lot of carbohydrate periodization with them as well, nutritionally, to make sure they're fueled and that we're getting that nice recovery as well. Because I think there's an intrinsic tie there with kind of another side of the sport that I think is misunderstood is the nutrition side and the periodization in that as well. So we do a lot. One of the benefits of having a university that specialises in applied science, strength and conditioning, nutrition and psychology is we have it all under one roof. So it's like the gift that keeps on giving, you know. So the athletes that come to us are pretty lucky. We have we're building a sponsorship program at the moment where if you're an athlete and you don't have funds for all this stuff, you know, you can come to us. We will put a program together, and our 4th-year students will deliver the program for you, so you can get effectively free S&C, and the students are getting free exposure at how to deliver programs multidisciplinary, and that's something we're doing in the Dundee area, which is quite important. Is we want to bring in athletes and say, look, you know, everyone can benefit. Students need to learn what's going to be like in the industry outside uni because it's a completely different world. And athletes need something a little bit more, and often they can't afford, you know, what we do. So this is a good bridge between both worlds, I think.
Oh, I think you're back. You dropped out for a bit. That's okay.
Yep.
Okay, hang on. That drop out. I had so much on my head. Now it just disappeared from me. I had like how many other questions based on what we were covering there. Shit. Oh man, now I can't even remember what I was going to ask. What were we just covering? We were just covering.
We're talking about. I think I mentioned we're good to offer S&C to athletes that can't afford it or don't have access to it. Come to the uni. The 4th years will deliver it, which is a good learning experience for 4th-year students. And the S&C program degree.
This is what I had,
which is good. Before that,
now I remember. In terms of the mitochondrial capacity, this might be a little sciencey for maybe some of the amateur fighters that are into this, but I want you just for myself as well. Do you know the mechanisms behind, I guess, creating new mitochondria in terms of from sprint exercise and even from low intensity exercise? Obviously, as you mentioned, there's multiple ways to do it. So there's obviously potentially multiple mechanisms in there, or do they kind of all run through the same mechanism?
It's kind of, your mitochondria has biodiversity and biogenesis, so it can replicate anyway and move around. So it's there. But what we know is that high kind of physiological load creates obviously physiological strength, and you get kind of the adapt mechanism. So the body has to adapt to that stress level. And by pushing more blood through into the tissue, and we're getting kind of much more, the oxygen's kind of diffusing, coming through the capillary bed, going into the muscle, being extracted, that what happens there is it provides more nutrients. More nutrients creates biodiversity, allows the mitochondria to move around and kind of regenerate. So you start to get much more development. That's probably the easiest way of thinking about it, with thinking about cellular biology. But so to get that, you need a massive stimulus. You need a stimulus to create some kind of oxygen change to allow the muscle to go, look, we need fuel, give us fuel, use the fuel, and then refuel the fuel tank up. And just high intensity does that. It just puts the body under enough physiological stress and load that the body has to adapt and change slightly to accommodate that. It's just like any training thing. It's like hypertrophy work. It's like you need that stimulus for the body to respond and then repair, recover, and remodel. It's similar at the biochemical level. What's happening here is the mitochondria is getting a deep enough stimulus. It's getting enough more, so you're starting to kind of create more kind of biodiversity and biogenesis. You're creating more mitochondria. And in turn, that obviously can take the oxygen, bring it in, and go through oxidative phosphorylation and all that kind of stuff, and we get more ATP generation. So that's it, kind of nutshell. So it's just comes out of stimulus. It's just like everything. It's about getting the right load, the right volume, the right intensity. I guess it's just like, in a lot of ways, it's just like classical S&C. It's just that whole thing about the right amount of stimulus to provide the right amount of result. Too little, you don't get anything. Too much, you start to suffer as well.
I was going to say,
it's just finding the sweet spot.
How much is too much of the spin? Because obviously, as you get into the more acidic environment, you're kind of doing the opposite of what you want in terms of creating your mitochondria. So is there, I guess, is it the interval length that's too long, or is it the total time spent in that heart rate zone?
I think it's probably. I think what happens is there's a couple of ways of looking at this. One is it's very difficult to maintain supramaximal sprints. So you're going to start to see a drop off in power pretty quick. So we in the lab, we test classic Wingates. We do 30 seconds, 1 minute recovery. With athletes, I'll do 10 seconds, 80 seconds recovery. And we'll do that 6 times because we can get enough recovery to get the supramaximal effort. So the problem would be that it'd be very difficult to maintain supramaximal work without fatigue coming in, and then that would have a massive knock-on onto technical skill. So you would pretty much spot it. I think anyway, we would spot it pretty much quick. So for us, it's about 60 seconds of work split over one session. So it's like when they come in the Monday, they're doing their 60 seconds. They can do it any way they want to do it, but they have to feel like they're dying at the end of it. That's it. If they think they're dying at the end of it, it's worked. A lot of times in the past, when you leave athletes alone, you find that they weren't probably hitting supra, which is why we make them all wear a heart rate monitor, so we can access it and go, that was not a supramaximal effort. You need to, and then likewise, we had a lot of athletes who were overtraining that got greedy, thinking they could do 6 days a week at supramaximal, and we had to rein that back and say, look, why are you spending so much time there? It's like, we need this just into 3 sessions, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever you want to do. And the other interesting thing is there's no rhyme or reason to it. So you can have a 24-hour separation, you could have a 72-hour separation between it, you could have slightly longer, as long as you get in roughly about 3 to 6 minutes of supramaximal work per week, you're golden with it. It's like, for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to impede adaptation too much, which is kind of interesting. So it can be pretty flexible. So you could do it post-pad work, you could do it post-bag work. You can fit it in pretty much anywhere. It's pretty easy. We do the bike. I mean, you can run. We use the bike. The reason I use the bike, especially a walk bike, is I can track the stats, I can track the metrics, but it takes a lot of load. It reduces the load in the joints. So and you don't need a lot of skill to ride a bike. Hannah Rankin's favourite term is you ride the bike like you're stolen it. So you just go. So it's pretty forgiving, which is why we like to use the bike. Assault bike's quite tricky. I think because a lot of people use the arms more than the legs in subsequent sprints. So you start to see a massive drop off in power on the assault bike. I like the assault bike, but a lot of times I'll make them put their hands behind their back and make them only use their legs and go for a supramaximal to make that happen. But yeah, it can be pretty forgiving, but the adaptations are pretty quick, and it just all comes down to kind of creating much more mitochondria in the tissue. Once the muscles get more mitochondria, more energy can produce. We have not found any issues to do with kind of CO2 or any of that type of stuff, or kind of acidosis or all those type of things, because we're not working that long.
Yeah, they're short.
It's a very short window. Yeah, so it's not a big issue for us. So
I guess on your, I'm going to link your sprint protocol into the description of this podcast. So if anyone's interested, Andrew's basically put together a little PDF, and it's got all those different sprint protocols for bike, bag work, and I think running. But on there, you've got power and endurance examples for each one. I guess if I was reading that as someone who's maybe just preparing for a local event or whatever, how do I know which one I should touch on?
So if your recovery is not good, you're going to want to do the endurance. If you're looking to max out power, so say for example you want a bit more power on a sprint, you'll just do the power one. So if you think about you're on a watt bike and you want to increase your wattage from say 600 watts to 700 watts, you're going to want to do the power one. So you need a bit more time between the sprints to recover, and that just makes common sense if you think about it. If you do a full maximal sprint, the more recovery period between it, the better that next sprint is going to be. So you're going to produce more power. So that's basically in a nutshell. If you want to recover, and the aim is to recover very quick, you want a much shorter interval between it, because you want to encourage the body to get into that nice relaxed phase and get that kind of recovery. So if you're looking to increase like a run time, you probably want to do a bit more power work. If you're looking to have much better recovery between sprints, you'll just do the endurance protocol. They're probably not the right names for them, to be honest, but we put it together. But you actually, to be brutally honest about this protocol booklet, has been the bane of my life, this thing. It came about because we did a 2-day conference and people asked for sprint protocols. And to be fair to us, we hadn't really thought there would be that much interest. So I was like, fuck. So it got put together and it morphed, and I had to cut it short because we've got loads and loads of protocols. And I thought this PDF could be 100 pages long and stuff. So we've released it as it is. I think I can't remember how many pages it is. There's quite a lot. I think it's like 10, 12 pages of different sprint protocols. But what we probably will do is maybe do a video series or a webinar series, or do something, and we'll show how we do it in the lab, what we're actually looking at, what the data looks like. And then that's going to be what we're probably going to put some CPD modules or something together. Because I think it makes more sense when you see it in context, when you see the data, and you can take an athlete and say, this is week 1, this is week 6, look at the difference in recovery between the two, and this is what it's given you. Because I think otherwise you just look at it and you think, fuck, 10 seconds on the bag, 20 seconds off, really? Is that it? It doesn't really embody the suffering that you need to undergo in order for that to happen, which is quite substantial. So if you're using the sprint protocol, you have to think it's like your life depended on it. You are having to go all out. And it's funny, isn't it? Because you go to a gym, like, it's got a lot of watt bikes, and I love the watt bike. I've got a couple of them myself. And I watch people on the watt bikes, and I think, you're not really pushing that particularly hard. And then you see somebody that is pushing it really hard, and you just feel for them. You go, yeah, you're doing well today. Because it is something else. We've had some of the best, UK boxing that come in, some world class, come to our labs and do wing gates. So we do obviously sprint lower body, so the bike for that, and we do the upper body arm crank. And the arm crank is worse than the lower body bike sprint. I mean, that arm crank is like horrific on a sprint. But when they all come in, they all look at the bike and think, it's going to be a piece of piss. And then they do it, and then they just look at you like you've just abused them for 60 seconds of their life. And then you make them do the arm crank one, and that's it. It's when they usually vomit out the back door. And it's it's interesting because you say to them, well, look, that's just 20 seconds of work 3 times.
Yeah.
It's nothing much to it. And then it's try to get them to understand what they perceive as intensity from a sports scientist point of view is not what we would class as intensity. And I know people hate me for saying that, but a lot of boxers think they're training hard, but they're not training hard the right way. And when we make that shift, the needle gets moved in a really interesting way, which is what I'm all about. But how do we push the needle the other way? It's funny. I love it. People hate me for it.
When I had a few years ago with my rugby team, that's exactly how I explained when we got to our high intensity work in the preseason was after the very first rep, you should feel like you don't want to do any more. You should just be done. But obviously we had 3 reps in that series, and that's the intensity it needs to be, for us to get what we want out of that session. And it works when you explain it like that. Like, you should be dead after the first one. They go, okay.
Yeah. How do you find people? Do you find them pretty compliant and quite keen to do it, or
yeah?
Do you find
especially in sports like rugby that often have a tradition of just beating the hell out of them like all the time. Some of the players don't like, but most players like they enjoy, especially when you've got to a point where you've done all the basic beforehand and they understand why, and they know, okay, it's only going to be for these sessions kind of thing, and it's leading into the season now. So for them to get a little bit of that extra stuff in, so that was like they responded well to that, and we'd do it like with wrestling and stuff like that. So it was a little different in terms of like they would do it with a partner, you know.
It's kind of funny because there's been a couple of quite big name athletes we've worked with that really didn't like the feeling of their heart rate going beyond, say, like 160 beats. Compete? So all their training. Well, that's the bizarre thing. I mean, some of these guys are really good Brazilian jiu-jitsu fighters, and you're kind of like, but your heart rate is probably peaking way higher than that. But when they put the heart rate monitor on consciously, for whatever reason, it seemed to be inhibiting them. They were like, we had a hard job with some of those to really get them to push the pace, because, oh my God, I can feel my heartbeat. And I'm like, well, that's a good thing. So let's not worry too much about that. It'd be and it's been interesting because we have had a few that have found it very difficult to push really high. And we've had a couple of S&C coaches bring these people in and say, we can't get their heart rate above 170. And I'm like, really? I'm like, well, we'll manage that. And then, it's kind of interesting. So, I mean, for me, it's been quite interesting the last few years, having UFC guys and Bellator guys in and stuff. And you kind of look at just the difference in kind of who's pushing hard and who's not pushing hard and who's coasting. And it would be quite surprising. People would be quite surprised at the people that are coasting, but who are still doing it phenomenally well.
Because they're just so technically sound.
Which then begs the question, like, that's it. And I think that's been the big thing for me with this whole thing is like, we can do all this research for as long as we want, but the reality is we're working with outliers. We're not working with the general population, and those outliers are pretty interesting within themselves because some of them aren't pushing particularly too high, but are at world champion level. They just have that ability, the time and the distance, the awareness, the spatial awareness, the cognition. And then you have the other kids. And I always say to kids, it's like, you may have two types of athletes, one that may be much more genetically gifted than you, but you can bridge the gap with the right amount of training. Because that athlete is going to be too lazy to take that next step up. And I think that's where sports science and strength and conditioning can play a massive role with a lot of athletes. That, especially in the beginning career, you can accelerate them really, really fast. Because you can say to them, look, we can give you the underlying foundations to catch you up with a lot of these really high level. And at that point, when you start to catch up, you need to step up the technical side of it. That's what you really need to get it. So it's kind of, I think it's an interesting sport, combat sports, from that kind of perspective. I think it's, the reality is every dog has his day in the ring. So you can prepare someone as much as you want. But, come off the line at the wrong time. Boom. It's good night. And we all get one.
That's true. The sprint protocols, coming back to that, you mentioned, 3 to 6 minutes, I guess, at close to peak heart rate per week. Do you need to do, I guess you mentioned over 6 minutes you start to maybe blend too much residual fatigue into technical training, but does something need to be changed in order to spur further adaptation? If you say you did this for a year, is there something you need to do, maybe more volume or intensity? Yeah,
you're going to have to mix. Yeah, you're going to mix it up. So we'll play around with resistance on the watt bike as well. So we'll change the resistance. So we'll just really mix up the sprint times as well. So Hannah starts camp, so she's back in camp now. We're just waiting to see what the opponent's going to be. So she's back on doing 20 seconds sprints, 10 seconds, 60-second recovery. So we'll do that for the next 2 weeks, and then we'll start to change it. So she'll do 10s, 20s, 30s, and we'll just play with it. Now, because she's at such a high elite level athlete, we can increase her sprints a little bit more than a normal athlete. So although we say 1 minute, we will give her sometimes a little bit more than 1 minute, just because of the way we want to periodize it out. And we'll play around with her. So we'll increase the watt bike resistance a lot in her session, so she's getting a bit more power generation. So we get a little bit more leg strength. Because one of the interesting things about the bike, one of the reasons I use the bike as well, is one of the interesting things is when you do the movement assessment, and then you have a bike that can measure symmetrical power and power ratios, you start to see that cross over. So interestingly, any athlete that comes in that has very bad asymmetry. And an asymmetrical issue to me is anything that's probably between 11 and 15% of a difference side to side. Under that, I don't really care about it, right? Because the sport is asymmetrical anyway. So, but if they have quite a large issue left and right, if there's a massive disproportion on symmetry, you tend to see it on the bike. And if the bike's like an Excalibur bike, a really expensive load bike, or even a watt bike, you start to see that difference in symmetry quite massively. And curiously, you start to see it in muscle oxygenation levels as well, that the muscle doesn't respond well. So the bike is pretty cool for that, because you can educate the athlete on how to spin the bike a little bit better, how to drive the leg through, how to kind of extend and stuff like that, and kind of fix that asymmetry kind of nicely on those sprints. And because they're doing it 3 times a week, you're getting 3 sessions where they're concentrating and focus on cadence and pulling everything through, which has been massive for us then getting back into strength work, because it's helping us tidy up a lot of things in a very kind of non-strengthy way. And then we're finding we're starting to get a lot more benefits in single leg work. And it's all just coming together for us. So the bikes works for us in multiple levels, from the mitochondrial side, developing that, right through to kind of pinpointing hip issues, length issues, stride. It's just, I mean, you can get so much from it. You know, people often say to me, "Do I need an expensive lab?" And I'm like, "No, just go to a gym that's got a watt bike." And you can get so much data from that. It's insane. You know, peak power, kind of recovery power, power drifts, recovery, heart rate recovery, symmetrical issues. You can get a massive amount on that and very simple stuff. So it's one of the, I meant to say that's one of the reasons we like to use the bike as well. It just gives us a lot of opportunities to do other things as well. But other athletes will do different things as well. So we don't always do sprints. A lot of other athletes that maybe need to have a real high level, a lower body, will do more long grindy sessions. We'll make them do critical power modelling. We'll make them hold certain wattage for longer periods of time, because we do work a lot with cyclists as well. So although combat sports, we get this sprint protocol could be used for any sport, but I would just say that if it was something like rugby, it was soccer, it was kind of something else, we would probably change the protocols around a little bit to accommodate what they're looking for as well. It's like, it's not a one glove fits all. It's close, but it's not perfect.
Where do you fit these?
So
I guess, where do you fit these in the training? You mentioned after technical training is one point. I think you mentioned in the morning, where they do afternoon technical pads. I guess in terms of week structure, where do these usually fit around everything else? And maybe just an example of how, I guess, the whole week structure looks with technical training as well.
So if we take Hannah just now, because she's in camp, so she'll do our... So we will just sit in the Sunday and we will just blueprint it. So we basically, because an athlete, especially elite level, things can change, media days come up, all that type of stuff. It's like a constant battle. But one of the benefits of sprints is it's very easy to fit them in, because it's only 6 minutes of work in total with the recovery time. So for Hannah, we will just look. So for any elite athlete we're working with, it will be schedule dependent. We do all our periodization on a Sunday for the week ahead. We have a general overall for the 8 weeks, but because she'll do media days or she'll do sponsorship days or whatever, it can go to shit quite a lot. So Sunday's like the shit day, where we sit and go, what's happening for next week? And we will plan. So she will do her sprints, one probably beginning of the week, middle of the week, and the end of the week is tends to be when she does it. She spars a lot on a Saturday. So we avoid sparring day. So sparring day, you know, for us, sparring day is a golden day. We don't want to have anything with it, and we want the following day to be recovery as well. So we'll try and probably cluster them Monday, Tuesday, and maybe like a Thursday. So that's the way it works for her. It works different for others. It just depends. Amateurs, we're pretty religious. We'll just say we know their sessions are Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So we'll try and get them in the Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Fridays tends in sparring for the amateurs is a Saturday as well. So we try and cluster all our spar around a Saturday to allow us to have the Friday off if need be, and the Sunday off for recovery. So we're quite big on that. And that works well for us. Other athletes, it's a bit of a challenge. Overseas athletes, if their schedule's busy, I'll just be tagging it in whenever we can get it. But I'll tend to say to them, look, if you can fit it in after a pad session or a technical session, which not been too crazy, that'll be fine. The other thing will be is if an athlete's cutting weight, then we will also look to bring them in the evening, and we'll do like a train high, sleep low protocol, which is our preferred method of weight cutting, just because we can deplete more glycogen in good high intensity sprints, get a little bit of EPOC, and then they can obviously sleep overnight, low carbohydrate, and we get that benefit of a bit of a weight cut that way as well. So we use it sometimes for managing some weight cuts. We don't tend to have a lot of issues with the weight cutting with our athletes, in fairness. It's not something it's usually the first thing we put in place when a new athlete is get that right under control from day one, so that it's not a big issue moving forward for us. So we use it for a variety of different ways. But amateurs, pretty regimented. Pros, it has a bit more flexibility, depending on their level. If they're like a pro that's early start career, it'll be a bit more regimented because most of them will still be holding down day jobs. So a lot of these sprints end up being at night for a lot of these athletes because it's the only time they can get in. Like most of the UK boxers that are professional are probably still holding down some kind of day job. So, and not everyone wants to go to a gym to do a super maximum sprint at 5 in the morning. So it can be a lighter. Yeah, but for us, it's pretty straightforward. We just say we need to have 3 of them. You can do Monday, Tuesday, and Friday, or you can do Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It doesn't really matter too much, but do not mix it with sparring days. That's the big rule. No, do not do them with sparring because we want sparring to be as fresh as possible. We're quite strict on sparring that we want it carbohydrate fueled, ready, and we want it good quality sparring. It's hard to get good quality sparring sometimes, so we're very, very religious on that. It's very like, that's the day where everything has to align kind of nice, so we stay away from it as much as possible.
Nice. No, it's perfect. I could keep asking you questions for another hour or two, but we'll end this here just so we don't take all your time as well throughout your day. But if anyone's wanting to follow, I guess, what you're doing, your research, anything like that, where can they find you?
So I'm hopeless with social media. I'm not very prolific on socials. I'm very good with technology, but I just hate social media. So Twitter is Andrew Usher, and Instagram I think is the Andrew Usher, and I'm floating around that high performance group now because of James. Should blame James for that one. And that's probably the best place you can do. We've set up a new website, combatsportperformance.com, where the PDF is. We're going to start to develop that out and have some kind of educational material. We'll probably link that back to Abertay University as well. And people can look at Abertay University. There'll be some bits and bobs probably on there somewhere.
Perfect.
So yeah. But I don't post a massive amount.
No, that's all good. But thanks for coming on, Andrew, and sharing all that knowledge with the listeners.
No, it's been a pleasure.
But we'll be in touch for sure. And we'll have to get you on for round 2 eventually as well, because there's obviously still a lot more to cover. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent.